everybody. It's Friday and we're back at Let's Do Lunch. This is our 30th episode of Let's Do Lunch, and Fridays are always about the business of music. We have a terrific show today. We have Shara Senderoff, president of Raisedinspace Enterprises, and David Bloom from Forbes. Raisedinspace Enterprises is a really interesting investment fund whose partners include Braun and Katz. It's also backed by the blockchain company Ripple, among other investors. And David and Shara are going to be speaking about the transformational power of data in the music industry, as well as in other industries. A couple of reminders, folks. First, introduce yourself in the chat. And when you do that, make sure to put set the drop down to all panelists and attendees, not just panelists, so that everybody can see your introductions. And then post questions in the Q&A. We will also have a poll about midway through the show. So make sure to answer the poll questions. Look forward to a great show today. I'll turn it over to our friend, David Bloom.
Hey, everybody. Delighted to be with you. Happy week of Cinco de Mayo. In honor of that, we've got a few Mexican wrestling masks out here. I am so delighted to be with Shara, who I have interviewed in the past a couple of times with her partner, Katz. Braun was, I think, screwing off because he doesn't have enough going on. He's kind of got a quiet life. So I've only talked with Shara and Zach about some of the things that Raisedinspace is doing, and they've got their hands on a lot of interesting stuff. So we will cover a lot of ground today. I guess to start, Shara, give people an idea. You and I talked a lot about Autogen, which was like sort of your alpha investment in terms of out of this, everything else, the spokes. It's the hub for the spokes of the wheel of your investments. But talk about where you're invested, and why Autogen matters to you, and where you're going with all this stuff in the big picture, how it fits into trying to transform the music business.
Sure. So I guess to jump in and kind of give a larger scale context, and then I'll sort of zoom in, is that we launched Raisedinspace as a venture to tackle an area that frankly needed someone to take responsibility, which is this sector of music and tech, which historically hasn't had an opportunity to dance well together, given the fact that the music business notoriously puts gatekeepers in front of gatekeepers in front of gatekeepers, has sort of this inability to lean into technology. And their reasoning has frankly here and there been correct, which is that a lot of the technology side has too often tried to fit a square peg into a round hole, and has come to the music business and said, you're broken here, here, and here, and in order to fix it, you need to utilize this technology. Well, that's not the case. And most often that's not the case, because the music business doesn't need technology at every corner to innovate what it's doing. It needs new behavioral changes and new incentive processes and new dynamics within the business itself. And that has to come from the inside out. And so when Scooter and Zach and I came together on Raisedinspace, our big initiative was to gain the trust of the music business, because we were insiders of the music business, and come to them with a overview and a offering, I guess is the best word, to say that we are trusted resources to them, and we are going to guide them in the right manner into what the future looks like and how best to step in and to take small steps into what will become a new future and a new opportunity for new revenue streams and new ways of looking at our old practices that will allow them to go into it in the right way. And so that's kind of the larger view of what we set out to do with Raisedinspace. And equally as important was the statement of our mission, which is to raise the value of music. It's not to find the next tech innovation that we can jump head first in. It's to ultimately bring back value to the music business and to solve their largest problems. And so I guess that's a great segue into the company that you brought up, Autogen, which the best way to know and understand what we're doing with that investment is that we intended to make a central investment into data, because we found that one of the biggest problems within the music business is that there is zero accountability and responsibility when it comes to the ROI of our digital ad spends. Everyone knows that when it comes to marketing an artist, when it comes to marketing an album, we have to be able to understand a formula for how we scale audience and how we drive eyeballs to those creative assets that we spend often months and months and months creating. And those assets are not, they're not extensive. There's a handful of them. They might be a single, it might be an album, it might be a music video, and then it's a tour, which will obviously get into the ramifications of what has happened from Corona with the touring business. But specifically when you're marketing an asset, the music business has been casual, to say the least, about how they spend their digital advertising dollars. There are few people that can even handle a conversation around an ROI, and it's simply not a responsible way to spend money to try to grow an audience. And so our goal was to really focus on a solution that could bring precision targeting to allow us to deliver the right music assets to the right people, and then be able to put a magnification on what a return on investment is. We have to be responsible about looking at that. And that begins with data. It begins with an audience. You have to be able to first aggregate that audience into one place so that you can dissect it and you can determine how best to use it. And that was one of the biggest problems, and has been one of the biggest problems over the last 5 years as it relates to the music business, which is that our stages, no pun intended, for how we magnify our content, it are the social networks, the Facebooks, Instagrams, Twitters, now TikTok, obviously in a big way. And if we're relying on houses that we don't have the keys to enter, how can we obtain the data to make the right, most responsible decisions about how we scale beyond and where we're headed? It's not.
So basically, when you're talking about so artists left and right have been connecting on Instagram and YouTube and places like that, and then you don't really get the data very well, even if you're the artist and you don't know what to do with it necessarily. So you've got to figure out how you can take that and find out who that audience is and really connect with that audience in lots of ways to build something more substantial. So give me an example of how your company's Autogen and others might improve that data knowledge in a sort of real world way. Like, give me a little quick case study if you can.
So the beginning of that starts with obtaining audience into your ocean. So one of the things that's interesting, and you nailed it, which is that our music artists have built their audiences in everyone else's oceans. They brought their audiences to Facebook first, they then brought them to Instagram, they then scaled them on TikTok and Twitter and all the likes. And by doing that, all of their fans came to those platforms. So in order to reach those fans, we have to effectively cast a net, put out a fishing rod, bring in fish, show them in a rental style manner an advertisement or a promotion for whatever it is that we want to promote. And then after we show them that promotion, those fish effectively swim back into the ocean. We never are able to catch them in our own. And so the beginning step of being able to put data science around the music business is to begin by creating our own oceans. And the only way
you're talking about farm raised catfish instead of wild caught. Right?
Yes, exactly. We need farm raised fish.
This is not catch and release, for God's sakes. I mean, it's like we want to keep them and we want to put them on the wall where we can see them all the time, right?
And we want to raise them on our farms. Exactly.
Raise them on your farms, put them through your little sluice gates, and do all that stuff that they do on farm raised catfish.
Yeah, because if they're raised on your farm, you know where they've been, you know where they're going, they're within your gated system, and you can track and you can learn and you can get to know them better. And so we have to begin that way. And so the first thing that Autogen does, which let me explain Autogen a little bit. So Autogen, the meaning behind the name is intelligent audiences. And to be able to understand your fans. Audiences in music are simply fans. So Autogen, of which Raised in Space has launched a white label of called Music IQ, which is also important because we all know that the music business needs really, really simple terms and digestible on-ramps to new platforms. We white labeled it as Music IQ on purpose because we wanted to give it a more digestible brand name, but also we wanted to be able to add modules that are specific to the music industry, because we know that while a lot is applicable to sports and entertainment as a whole, there are a lot of specific data sets that are really informative for our larger roadmaps that are specific to music. So first we catch the fish and we bring them into our farm. And then from there, we have them in our farm once and for all, and we can go out and serve them up different pieces of promotion to determine what they like. It's no different than to stay on this farm.
Do they like corn? Do they like bulgur wheat? You know, are they more into like nightcrawler worms? Like what do they like to eat? So that's pretty interesting stuff. Now, in talking with you and your partner Zach, you both had talked. We talked back in like Christmas time, I think, and then we talked again post start of the epidemic. And I'm really curious about the changes that you've seen in terms of the investment climate, the things you're looking at from now versus 5 months ago, and what the opportunities are as you look across this universe. I mean, what are you interested in now that you weren't before, and vice versa? You know, interestingly enough, and I think that this is completely attributable to who Zach and I are as people, is that nothing has changed for us. And I say that in an interesting way, in that a lot of our investments and our investment thesis was directed toward the trends that are seeming like they're trends right now. For example, gaming and I guess not even esports, gaming and live streaming and virtual goods and digital goods. That craze that seems like it's a craze now because of Corona, it's not. It's been in the works for a really long time, and its path is still on track. It will be accelerated now as a result of people spending more time on their screens, people turning to gaming, but our investment strategy has been the same now as it was at the beginning, which is find great entrepreneurs. Great entrepreneurs are not rattled. They're not moved whatsoever by challenges and by pandemics. It does not phase the best ones that are out there. And so our strategy has always been find concepts that don't address a Band-Aid, but address a long-term future, and find the founders who can very systematically and very intelligently architect a roadmap that can give them enough runway to go the distance. And I think that if anything is more of a focus now, it's validating the founders that have thought far beyond this time, because your ability to maintain your funding and to not run out of funding around this, what could be like 24 months, is a really, really important piece, because we're going to lose a lot of companies. Because this is who's resilient. I mean, I think that's a really crucial question. I don't know that I would say that probably a lot of investors, a lot of companies were optimized on breaking something, right? That was the whole, you know, from Mark Zuckerberg on down, you know, move fast and break things. What they didn't do was build a resilient company. I mean, I'm not talking about Facebook in particular here, but 2016 suggests they were vulnerable too. They weren't resilient in a useful way, and that's probably a new trait that you are now particularly aware of. It's like, it's not just how do you get through, but like, how do you build a resilient business model? How do you build something that'll sustain? I mean, what you mentioned to me, it was a little bit like a bunch of old boyfriends calling you up and saying, hey, you know, it didn't work out before, but now you want to date now? It's like, I mean, you've got these companies hitting you up, right? I mean, all the old guys you said no to are coming back, right? They came back because they said, look, now, I guess we can specify that to live streaming. That's a lot of what we've seen come through our door again. And the first go round of live streaming for Raised in Space was as soon as we launched 18 months ago, we got inundated with, well, first off, just to pause and segue a little bit, our LP is Ripple, who is a blockchain company through and through. They reinvent international payments. They have a focus on cryptocurrency. They are a centralized business, but have a decentralized component and are obviously proponents of the future of blockchain. Blockchain, Zach and I have a very, very clear view on how we believe it will benefit us now, in 3 years, and in 5 years. It's not a buzzword for us. We've been looking at blockchain technology for 5 years before we started Raised in Space, but to the outside world, they landed on that buzzword, and every deck I got was X business built on the blockchain. With blockchain, off, right. It's always like that little, it's like pet food with blockchain, or exactly. You know, whatever. It's really funny to see some of that happen. Anything
anything with blockchain. And it's funny because I always say to people, like, I don't send you an email and say like, hey, I sent you a letter on, I sent you an email on the internet. I never say that. So why are you telling me you built something on blockchain when it's not relevant to the mass consumer? But to step back,
a year and a half ago, that was kind of like, I mean, the blockchain was red hot. That was right after the big blow up to 20,000 or whatever the price was, the crazy price was for Bitcoin and all that. So it was super hot. So I get that, but it's now sort of settled back down to something a little more sane. And there's also a sense of, you know, this is a tool. It's not just throw money at it. And, you know, what did somebody say? Tourism capital. That's what somebody said to me. I think Peter Levy, when I had him on here a couple of weeks ago, he said tourism capital is no longer driving by in quite the same way. So
no, everything's changed, and that's where it goes to live streaming, which is we got deck after deck on live streaming platforms, and we ultimately passed on live streaming a year ago. And the reason why is because our view is that the biggest competitor to live streaming is live, and that's still relevant today, in that live streaming is left, right, and center. Everywhere we look, there's a new performance of an artist that is performing in our living room. And it's not to say that that's not an experience that we believe in and that it's not great for right now. But the reality is live is going to come back. It's going to come back changed, and we can talk about that, but it's going to come back at some time. And what does that mean for the future of live streaming, or let's call it virtual performances? And that poses a really important question, which is that if we know that it's going to evolve moving forward, given that live will return, and if we knew that it was never going to be a standalone business to begin with, which was my view, now how do we look at what we've done within Corona as it relates to cadence, strategy, creativity when it comes to an artist performing online? And we went into it, I guess let's call it, in the last 8 weeks. And when I say we, I'm talking about the music industry as a whole, from labels to managers. We dove headfirst into, we got to get live streams up. We got to get live streams up. We didn't account for business model, strategy. Are we selling tickets? Are we giving this away for free? And
all those little things, I like all that stuff was, I mean, it's like, well, let's do stuff for charity and then we'll figure it out, right? I mean, but you're right. There's not I mean, we had a 1,000-year-old tradition of live performance that's been building up. Here's how you do it, and here's what's good, and here's what's bad. And that was a pillar of the way musicians make money. In fact, a very large pillar. And now they don't have that, so they go to live streaming. And not this, but they have other options, right? So they can go to that, which is Travis Scott in Fortnite, right? That's our new opportunity. So how does this fit in? How do you build? I mean, who are you working with to build the models? Who are you doing to try to create a business around this thing that was just a sort of a reflex, like, crap, we don't have any place to play, let's go online. I mean, how do we make a business now?
So let's look at it like this, and you and I have talked about this in every time we've spoken, which is that the music business, and Zach and I are like broken records of how often we say this, the music business has been a 3-lane highway. Buy my tickets, sell my merch, come see my live show. I mean, listen to my music, buy my merch, come see my live show. Effectively, we lost basically 2 of those highways. So now it's a 1-lane highway, and the 1-lane highway that's really available is streaming. Streaming is not going to save the day when it's become a fraction of our overall revenue pie. There is zero way that it increases in the short term to help us whatsoever. So now we have to turn to, how do we iterate lanes 2 and lane 3? Merch is a challenge because we can't expect people to pay money when millions and millions of people are out of jobs. And then the third being the live streaming component, which can segue us into where we go next, which is when we launched the early live stream shows, early meaning 6 weeks ago, the creativity included what you just did. It threw up a background, a digital background behind a guitar. Is that innovation? How long are audiences going to be interested in watching somebody perform over and over and over again with the same, in the same format, with the same level of creativity that is not innovative from a production standpoint. It doesn't allow immersive activity. It doesn't allow engagement. And so now let's segue over to Fortnite and what they just did with Travis Scott. Epic did launch this a year and a half ago with the Marshmello concert within Fortnite. This is what Travis did was not new. What Epic did with Travis was not new. And frankly, it started 5 months ago to develop that show. Now, it was beautiful. I watched it 20 times. I'll watch it again and again and again. I loved it. So I'm not taking anything away from it. But what I am saying is that when it comes to innovation in performance, and let's call that, we have two paths to go. We can go live streaming and live performance, which can give us a revenue stream if we sell virtual tickets, but the weight of that will require us to reinvent and elevate our creativity over and over again to make it a recurring revenue stream. Or we go into the world of gaming, which allows for much more interactivity, much more opportunity for microtransactions, and you can build layer upon layer to create a business that likely is far more long-term than just simply translating live to online, which...
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting though, when you start to talk about an interactive experience like a game. Fortnite has a communications component because it's across now 350 million user accounts on every platform, and it's free, and there's heavy usage, but it's also used for a social component. So that's perfect for the stuff. They already have a whole economy built around selling digital goods. And then you guys come in with things like, well, let's keep those digital goods unique by, various ways with like blockchain, where you can actually insert some scarcity. And then you layer music experiences. And we see that they've just launched their Party Royale opportunity with Epic, which I think is really smart. But also, as you say, this has been building for a while. This is well timed, but not an overnight creation. It is, creating a space where Epic's going to put some of its artists in there, and you can just see, okay, so now maybe we can do game assets, maybe we can do social space asset, whatever. There's a lot of things you can start to play with in really interesting ways, I think. So that's where you get to go, right?
This is interestingly full circle to the beginning of our conversation, because exactly what you mentioned, it seemingly to the outside world is the beginning of music into games. It is and it isn't, but more so it's the beginning of an evolution to understand what is the version of music that exists and should exist within games. And my sort of overarching themes and principles of what I always have done throughout my career, when I started in the music business and then I moved into tech, the movie business, moved into tech and moved into the music business, was don't try to completely reinvent the wheel. Take what history has given you as a path to follow and iterate on it based on where we are with technology and where we are as humans and where we are with emotion. And do not ignore the human aspect that is guiding you for what people want. And I say that because we started the conversation as it related to data and the use of data to grow all these revenue streams that we've now talked about, even loosely, but fairly deeply in a short amount of time, across the music business. So take live. Live is going to come back. We know that. And you and I had a great quick conversation yesterday about what happens to the smaller segments of live. The big artists are going to bring people into arenas when they feel right to go into arenas. But what happens to the smaller acts who... The
Troubadour, the Blue Note, the Blue Note is now doing, the Blue Note Classic Jazz Club is now doing for 4 months, they say, $10 a month, you get access to these wonderful archives of jazz performances. If you're a jazz geek, that's like mana. The Troubadour is doing a GoFundMe because the classic West Hollywood thing is doing a GoFundMe right now because it's in big trouble. It's been around for 50 years. Elton John, Billy Joel, and a zillion other great artists have played there, but it's in trouble. So how do they survive?
There's two critical points into that, which is one, and this goes back to Zach and I's mission with Raised in Space, is this is about music. We have to use technology to save what is most important in music, which is emotion, which is the feeling that music gives us, and does for us, from inspiration to evolution. It changes us as people. We have to be able to help the live business come back. And that starts with utilizing data and technology to save the smaller businesses and smaller pieces that are so critical to our industry. Let's talk about the Troubadour. When the Troubadour reopens and starts to come back, they're going to struggle with the parameters of 20 to 50% less people, social distancing. We talked about it yesterday. I told you I've been kind of fascinated by the idea of what happens to the opening act. Do people want to come in and see the performer that was set up to begin their career by getting that little amount of exposure, and that was also a cost help, and it's a big puzzle for the larger artists. But from there, what happens to the Troubadour? They have to immediately say, we now have to spend any marketing dollar, because we don't have a lot and they all matter. We have to spend them in the right way. We need precision digital marketing and positioning and messaging to reach the people who are most likely to come into that venue. And that, now more than ever, geolocation becomes critically important. If people aren't traveling the way that they used to, we have to zero into the radius around these venues. We have to start.
It's backyard. It's take care of your backyard, right? I mean, it's
Exactly.
like you're now like the local cleaner. You know,
Yep.
You're not buying for somebody who's 2
Yep.
hours away. You're buying for the person who's going to be able to drop by, who's 2 miles down the road or whatever. And you're
Yeah.
doing that local cable buy as opposed to, I don't know, putting on Rolling Stone or whatever.
Exactly.
So it's a whole different dynamic.
We have to change the way we market and the way we target, and we have to bring in the people that are most likely to come in so that we can obviously lower our spend and raise our conversion potential. But then secondarily, we have to figure out a way creatively, instead of putting the onus on the creativity of the show, we have to put the creativity on the comfort of the fans. And what does it mean? You brought up an amazing example yesterday on what happens if the mosh pit is gone. And
yeah. What's a punk rock performance look like without a mosh pit? I mean, I can't imagine the Clash in 1981 in
Right.
London without a frickin' mosh pit, for God's
Right.
sake.
And when we say that we're headed for a new world, we're really headed for a new world. So now let's take that segue and go into what you mentioned, which is Epic's launch within Fortnite of Party Royale. That is the Diplo more live performance in comparison to the 5-month planning of Travis Scott's big event within the game. So I probably most people on this have a good understanding of what we're talking about, but it is very deep music business. So let's step back for one quick second and give an overview, which is that Fortnite launched a very pre-planned performance with Travis Scott that was completely visual CGI, pre-produced. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience. Now they're moving into what does it mean to be able to activate artists more quickly and be able to do more frequent performances. So the Party Royale early launch, and I believe that they said it's not necessarily permanent, but I know they're going to Steve Aoki. I think they announced that yesterday or today, but they launched an early performance with Diplo on the Party Royale Island, which is no violence, no guns, no attacking.
Right.
It's simply to kind of go be in an environment with friends. And interestingly enough, because I watched it and I was trying to figure out like how I felt about it and did I get any emotion? And at first I felt like it was weird. It was like a video screen of Diplo performing and there were 2 girls behind him who were humans, not animated figures. So I was like, okay, we now have the real world in here. And now I'm my own character who is in this world by myself. And do I feel any emotion? But what I'm seeing around me is beautiful, but it's a video game. And am I feeling the music? And instead of putting up this wall of, well, this is taking away from live, I want to be open to all of what we can do with music. And it's interesting because I found myself by the end, and I asked a couple people, everyone has kind of mixed feelings. I think we'll evolve into what we feel. There is a level of emotion in it. You're in a different world. You get a new sort of visual and a new sort of experience, but will it ever replace live? No way. And so we have to be able to help from the inside of the music business out. We have to be able to make sure that we assist live to survive. And because it is coming back, and it's just what is the timeline? And I know you said it at the beginning of the call, it's scary. It's scary to think that it's likely not for truly for a couple years. And I get in this debate 5 times a day is it 6 months? Is it 18 months? Is it 2 years? It's going to slowly evolve into what will then be a new normal. And to think about us being at shows wearing masks, that's real, and we have to accept it.
But and fewer of us in it, and it's going to be it's a different dynamic. You're not going to be all huddled together at the front of the stage like it used to be at the Troubadour, for instance. You're not be 400 people jammed up front just to watch to whoever. This does bring me though to our poll questions, which I think it's 12:31. So Laura, if you can put up the poll questions, and we'll also take some questions from the audience at this point. We have 3 or 4 of them posted in the Q&A area. If anybody else has a question they want to lob in, I'll try to work into the time we have left. But please answer the poll. And the first question, I think, is I'm trying to find out what sector of the industry you're in, when you think live will come back, and finally, I can't remember the other one I asked about, in major venues versus small venues. And then how does your business leverage data? Answer those just so we get a sense of the room. But if you have a Q&A, go to the Q&A section and post a question there. One of the first ones, Jeff Stansfield, who is a bit of a ringmaster of sorts of his merry band of audio video specialists, asks if is there a trend toward open sourced metadata where people can share information across platforms and all that, or is it more walled garden stuff? What are you seeing in terms of the things you're backing and where it's going?
I think the answer to that is twofold. I think the same way that people buy a house and own the keys, control the keys to that house, it depends on where the world goes with how we can utilize data. And I think that we need to be compliant first, and that's a new world that we're in. Talk about a new world. Data privacy and data compliance is more evolved and more important than ever. And there's a lot of constraints around how personal information is shared and where and when it can be shared. So I think that metadata is a really interesting question. That's a great point when it comes to music, because music metadata and the ability to understand how an individual consumes, what they consume, when they consume. The music business has historically done a terrible job when it comes to metadata within platforms. We're going back 3 to 5 years later after the launch of a Spotify to be like, hey guys, now you should put in the tags of what your music sounds like and who worked on it. We can't do that later. We have to do that.
It's only 60 million songs. It's not that big a deal, right? You can just do it overnight.
Exactly. We'll do that. And so I guess the best answer to that is the use of metadata when it comes to open source is simply as open as the sources can be and are willing to be, and where a platform comes in and when they're launched and how important they think about metadata and databases and building the architecture behind their business. And for me personally, I will not invest into anything that is not foundationally sound as it relates to maintaining data, keeping data, having a data strategy, and understanding what you're doing and what your responsibility is with the data that you have. And then to answer that in a larger form, our investment into Autogen, which is the data company we mentioned, was focused around a need to drive the message that data is critically important, and the way we structure it and the way we think about it has to happen. And a lot of what that company is doing is they're leading the charge in how to think about it, what it means, and to try to kill the notion that data is owned, because I own my data, David, you own your data, Ned owns his data, and that's where it begins and ends. So there's a lot of I own my data conversation that we own the data that happens in music. And frankly, my response to it is, guess what? I own my data. You don't own it. And that's really where it begins and ends. But it's an educational journey. And my message is I could talk about it for days, but it's really important that people and companies and founders and technologists understand the intricacies of how to use it for good.
Yeah. Now we have a question from Valerian Bennett, Pop Network, wanting to know what your work is with BitFury Surround, which I noticed also has one of its people at least popped into the chat room and identified themselves. So Bitfury Surround
I love all
sounds
of my crypto.
sounds like something I did to get in trouble again. But what is Bitfury Surround, and why did you guys get involved with it?
So we're not involved in it. I think that the larger question probably coming in, and if I'm wrong, then whoever asked it can hit me personally, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation about it. Is I think that it's the notion of where is crypto headed, and it's more for us. And I guess let me take that a little bit in a different direction. The future of digital currencies and digital collectibles is a really important part of why we launched Raised in Space, because we believe that there needs to be an evolution for how we consume and what we own. So think about it like this, which we also talked about, and you and I have talked about a lot, which is the idea of owning a physical vinyl and what that meant for you as a fan, and your ownership and loyalty over the artists that you loved.
And your expression of your love for them. I mean, it becomes this taste signifier, right? I mean, you have your big, like, you should put up your cool spacey vinyl background, because we've now seen your platinum plaque. But yeah, there we go. See, that's totally appropriate. Yeah, but you're right. So the vinyl became this way to show what you care about. Now we virtualized all that stuff. So how do we show the things we care about? How do we signify, oh, we like that movie, and we like that artist, and we like this album was really important, or whatever? So how do we do all that? So, and
when we digitize that, what do we lose? And when we digitize it, what do we gain? And I think that that's the important part around the idea, the notion of digital currencies or collectibles or whatever it is. And the way that we look at that within Raised in Space is that you have to be able to take value from a new version of the vinyl. So just to your point, if I give you a digital collectible of your favorite band or artist, where does that live, and what do you do with it, and how do you frequently showcase it? Is it
right?
Does it live in your
you don't have a digital shelf to show off in Fortnite, right? I mean, if you had a little space in Fortnite, for instance, or one of those where you could have your, I don't know, London Calling, since I liked the Clash back then, or Beyonce, or whoever it is, Travis Scott's Astronomical, just to show off this thing, but David, to show it off.
You just gave away my secrets and my path, which answers for any of that group who has questioned this, where we're headed. And where we're headed is to what environments can we build within Raised in Space, what companies can we invest into, and how can we push a new evolution in how do you showcase your expression, your loyalty, your personalization, your emotion, and how do you engage with music, and how do you show your friends, for your community, how to express yourself. You're doing it right now with your background, but
absolutely
that evolves big time. It's not just a static, in my mind. It's AR, it's VR, it's deep integration. It's the utilization of digital currencies over fiat money. It's a change in every way, shape, or form. And guess what? It's gonna be uncomfortable, but it will get there. And that's what we're focused on, is how to make that comfortable feeling a little bit more comfortable.
So anonymous attendee, who clearly is a chicken, said, how do you believe a chicken in a virtual room is like, come on, step up. How do you believe blockchain technology can make the most impact right now for the music business? And how many music blockchain companies have you met with? 98% of the people who Raised in Space has networking dinners with don't have a clue about blockchain technology, how it works, how it will impact the music business, or how the tech can be used right now. Let's see. They want to have actual music blockchain projects included in these dinners. Otherwise, no growth or adoption will happen with the same old school mentality. So how do you get these old school guys?
Growth and adoption begins with education, and it ends with education. And so the reason
and dinner, really good dinner.
And food. So the reason that our dinners happen the way that they do is because the means to innovation and the means to the future is by taking the hands of the past and walking them there. And so when we educate the music business and the music industry, we effectively allow them to open up and be more willing to step into the future. The blockchain point is a really important one, which is how does blockchain impact the music industry today? And I'm really a massive believer in actionability quickly, efficient steps forward, and not, I'll never invest in a company and say, see you in 5 years and you'll see what happens with that company. Anything that we invest into will be utilized in the short term. So to answer the question on blockchain's value and use today, let's turn it back to the technology. It's not ready to be utilized today in music in a lot of ways. We can utilize it in the ways that it is usable, which is the notion of blockchain is to, then this is simplifying it to a degree to just move us through this conversation efficiently and quickly, but blockchain is the idea of transparency. It's the idea of auditability. It's the idea of micro contracts that allow you to set parameters, to set boundaries, to meaningfully assign those boundaries, and then to go back and historically know how those boundaries were set, and to be able to do that in a transparent way that doesn't allow for fraud, and it doesn't allow for any of the black market moves that ironically have happened at the early outset of crypto, not blockchain. Blockchain is not scalable in the way that we would like it to be today. It will be very soon. And so my belief in how we utilize blockchain is incrementally, systematically, allowing us to dip our foot in the right way, and also to appropriately put it on areas of the music business that are ready for it. So to my point early on about fitting a square peg into a round hole, I saw 25 companies focused on the reinvention of royalty payments and rights management. Rights management and royalty payments can't be reinvented today by way of technology. That's an inside the industry problem that went all the way up to Capitol Hill, thanks to some of the amazing lawyers in our business who fought for copyrights and are focused on changing the internal system with which we can ultimately change the distribution of capital and royalties. And when the time is ready for blockchain to be able to impact that positively, I promise we will be at the forefront of making that happen.
Great. Now we've got time for about one more question. I think John Petroselli had a good one. What are your thoughts on pay-per-view? I mean, before we leave that, I did want to say that, like what you're saying, but using the technology for what it's good for now, it reminds me of how Netflix got its start. It wasn't able to stream live video directly or stream video to you at a high bandwidth in 1996, but they could use the internet for you to say, send me email or mail me a DVD of this thing at good quality at a reasonable price, and also no late fee. So they used the technology at the time, and then 10 years later, when the technology was better and they could start streaming, they started doing that. Now they got 15 million or 15.8 million new subscribers in their first quarter. So they're doing okay. But John Petroselli asks, what are your thoughts on pay-per-view live streaming of music on artist-owned online properties? So this is, I think, particularly of use to, I think, particularly for like legacy artists who don't have a new album out all the time, but definitely have a durable audience who will show up for them. I think there's a real opportunity for those guys. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And my view on it is very definitive, which is that I think that we as an industry have historically undervalued our creativity and our assets. And we cannot, and we have to draw a line in the sand, and artists should be charging for their performances. Yes, there's a component that can go to charity. There's a component and a cadence with which you can show yourself and be available and do performances here and there that are for free. But to charge for what you're giving the world, in any other industry, we would not knock that. Why do we knock it in ours? And to your point, David, which is great, on legacy artists being able to bring a comfort, and we talked about this yesterday, there's no coincidence to why I've been listening to the Stevie Ray Vaughns and the B.B. Kings and all the musicians that my dad raised me on, because they give me comfort in a world that has so much unknown right now. And we need to do a combination of respecting where we came from as a music industry, bringing that comfort from some of those amazing artists who are available to do that, helping them utilize technology to be able to bring that to life, which a lot of the labels are really helping to figure out how to guide them, and then allowing them, and to the point of that question, which was, I think might have had some of the intention of asking whether pay-per-view on an owned and operated platform from an artist is valuable. I think the percentage of artists and their management teams and their teams as a whole that can build owned and operated platforms, simply that have enough experience and knowledge to build businesses that stand alone. If they can, great, because you could take a larger percentage of the margin. But if you can't, then you can utilize the communities in platforms that allow multiple artists to perform and allow you to put up a quick landing page to be able to do it, to gain some additional eyeballs and to also have a quick offering that you can go out with quickly.
Yeah, and this is obviously where data is going to come. Once you have that sort of thing, data becomes incredibly valuable. Again, keep them on your farm-raised catfish, not your wild-caught catfish.
Exactly.
Real quickly, we got the poll results. We closed this thing. Thanks to those who chose to respond. What industry sector are you in? Big shock. About 40% of you are in, almost half are in music, but we have a lot of folks in other areas like online media, about 1 in 6 of you, and in film and TV. And the rest of you, I think, just wandered in off the streets, the virtual streets, to come listen to us because Shara is so much more interesting than looking at virtual streets with nothing on them. And 2, how soon before we see music in major venues, this is such an interesting component of this, because if people aren't going to major venues, but they still want music, we have to give it to them in various ways. And this is an opportunity, I think, to do it. So only 4% think by July, despite the opening in some places. September, start of the fall, a tiny bit more, 9%.
Yeah.
The holidays, 15%, but about 41% of you. And this has been pretty consistent with other questions. I think we've had similar kinds of questions in some of the previous conversations I've done here for Let's Do Lunch, and I think Ned would accord with some of the other ones that they've done. So first half of next year, but another significant part think second half. So that's 71% of you think next year sometime, and that's a lot. So build your businesses accordingly. Make your online presence work for a sustained amount of time. You got to figure out this is going to be the way it's going to be for a little while, and I think that's probably true. I mean, because even when you reopen, when the Troubadour reopens, and you can't sit at that bar in the front room, you can't huddle up in front of the stage. That's a very different experience. You know, if you go to the Staples Center, the flip side of that, and you've got a pod of people that are together, and then 3 spaces, and then a pod more, and they're all broken up, and so they can only put 10,000 into a 20,000 person venue. I mean, that's a very different experience, and it's a very different economics too. Yeah. Figure out how you can do a business for this. So, and then finally, the third question: how well does your business leverage data? This is a lot of them think they're doing pretty good. Looks like 50%, another quarter think that it's essential in some areas or important in some areas, but not so much in others. And thankfully, blessedly, only 4% think that it's not really important at all. But I'm glad to see at least 1 in 5 of you are looking at ways to explore how it can help. I guarantee you, in a data-driven future, which is where we are rushing, and it's only been accelerated in this moment, this is where we're rushing. Finally, I am David Bloom. You can find me on Twitter at David Bloom and on LinkedIn at David L. Bloom. Twitter, Shara, where can they find you? Real quickly.
At Shara Senderoff on Twitter, at Shara.Senderoff on Instagram.
Great. And I'll be back with Ned and Tinzar are doing a fantastic gaming conference, virtual gaming conference in 2 weeks. And they've irrationally decided to invite me back to host an amazing panel on the second day of that. So I hope you all can join me. I'll turn this back over to Ned to take us home.
I just got to say, wow, guys, Shara and David, that was an amazing conversation. You know, from somebody who spends most of my time in the game industry, it's really refreshing to hear kind of the innovative thinking, you know, from you, Shara, in the music industry. I think, you know, there's not enough going on, and you certainly supercharged us all here today. So, folks, next week, we have a whole slate of programming planned. Monday, Rob Holmes. Rob is Roku's VP of Programming, so he'll be on the show with Colin Dixon on Monday for our Business of Streaming show. Take a minute this weekend, folks, to get away from your screens and look at the sky and smile and enjoy the weekend. We'll see you all back next week. Thanks again.